On the show today, we sit down with Christy Fox, who shares with us what it's like to make a big change in careers. After a decade of recruiting talent for aerospace and IT companies, Christy made the jump to emergency medicine. Join us as she shares what drove that decision for her and how she's been able to utilize skills from her previous work while finding a balance that fits all aspects of her life. This is The Career Cue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Stacey Harris.
So, Christy, it's great to have you in studio today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This is actually a really fascinating topic. I always have a personal interest in talking to people about what appear to be major career transitions and how they came to the decision to take the jump.
Right.
And I'm actually looking forward to digging a little bit deeper into your experience and what you kind of see looking ahead. All right. We're talking to you today about the career transition from the technology industry into healthcare.
Right.
Let's talk about what your role was in tech. What were you doing at that time?
When I first started in IT, I actually started as a technical recruiter, brand new. I didn't even know what a recruiter was. We need to back up a little bit to figure out how I fell, so to speak, into recruiting because, like I said, I didn't even know what a recruiter was back then. So I had just graduated college, had a very useful bachelor's degree in English with a writing emphasis. I knew I did not want to be a teacher, but that's about all I knew. I did not. And that's not to say that teachers have a hard job. So that's just not my bucket, right? So I was just mass sending out resumes to anybody and everything. And with my writing background, I thought, well, I could probably be a technical writer. So I had sent out resumes to multiple, apparently, recruiting agencies. And I got a call from one of the presidents of a local recruiting company. And he said to me, hey, I know you applied for this job, but I want to talk to you about something else. And so I said, why not?
So you were open.
I was open.
Yes.
You're a new college grad. Of course, you have to be open to different opportunities. And like I said, I had no idea what he wanted to talk to me about. I went and interviewed with him, still did not know what he wanted me to do. But he offered me a job, and I said, sure. So I started recruiting, and my initial job in recruiting was I worked for a small company that did a lot of international recruiting for aerospace engineers and developers and designers like drafters. They helped Boeing basically recruit the engineering staff for their 777 project, the 777 stretch. So it was a crazy job. We would spend a lot of time doing something in the morning, come back from lunch, and have to undo it based off the whims of the owners of the company. And then I did that for about 3 years, and then I made that transition into IT. So I left that company and ended up at an IT consulting and systems integration company. Yeah, so when I decided to leave the first company that I was at, and I kind of just had enough of the start, stop, and like they were, I think, certifiably crazy. But I learned a lot from them. I will say I learned a lot from them. I got to travel to amazing places and meet amazing people, but when I first told, there were two presidents of the company that I was leaving. It was a small enough company I could go into his office. And I said, I need to leave. It's time for me to leave. And he says, no, I'll give you a raise effective today. And I went, what? He says, no, you cannot leave. I said, I can. Yes. We had this long debate about whether or not I could leave. And so I told him, I said, things have to change if I'm going to stay. And you have 2 weeks to figure it out. It didn't change. So after 2 weeks, I left, which was great because my last 2 weeks and all my vacation was at my higher pay rate. And I left and went into IT recruiting. And at that time, it was probably 1998, I think. So kind of just as the dot-coms and everything were really emerging in the market. And it just seemed to me to be something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more dynamic. And so I went to another recruiting company that specialized at that point in placing contract engineers and developers in contract positions. Their biggest client was Microsoft. I worked for the non-Microsoft team, so supported other clients outside of Microsoft. And then eventually that small company got kind of merged with an IT consulting and business integration company. And I ended up being the recruiting team lead / manager for the recruiters on the Northwest team. So I kind of managed their daily activities, worked really closely with the sales team, and also I had two remote recruiters in Portland that reported to me as well. So in the middle of all of that kind of stuff, I also had my own clients that I had to maintain and support, and it was amazing. It was an amazing job. So kept me busy.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So how long were you in that IT recruiting role?
Altogether, I was there for 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So my whole recruiting life lasted about 10 years. And that
Okay.
included the first 3 years
Right.
at my first job doing aerospace and then moving into IT. So 10 years altogether. So I survived the first .com bust, I will say.
They should really have T-shirts for that,
Yes.
right? So let's talk about at what point during that 10-year journey did you start thinking that perhaps there might be something different in store for your career?
I would probably say about halfway through. I think I had been at the second company for a couple of years, and I started thinking I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the people I worked with. The money was great. I'm not going to lie. But at some point, to me, the money wasn't giving me the satisfaction that I think a lot of people think it does. And I started thinking, like, could I do this job anywhere? Well, if I had to move to Nebraska, I probably couldn't really do this very well in Nebraska. Different kind of recruiting maybe,
Right.
your office temps and things like that. Can I do this job part-time? Yeah, no, not really. I mean, I think people have tried to do it part-time and are moderately successful, but to maintain the level of success that I was accustomed to and that I wanted to achieve, I couldn't do that part-time.
Right.
And so, I mean, those were kind of like the two big things is like, okay, I'm not really unhappy, but I'm not really happy. And is this really what I want to do forever? No, I don't think so. I mean, like you fall into something and you give it a whirl and you end up being good at it. And I think I learned so much in that process. And I'm still really good friends with some people that are in that industry. So I just started kind of thinking, like, well, what would I want to do? What would I want to do? What would that look like? And so that's kind of when that thought process started.
So what are the things that bubbled to the surface as you were starting to think about that?
I don't know. So, I mean, there's so much out there that, my first thought was, well, what am I trained and qualified to do? Well, I have an English degree with a writing minor. It narrows your field. I mean, like liberal arts degrees, I mean, I think there's something to them. And I picked that degree because when it was time to pick a major, that's what I liked and that's what I was good at. Not having the foresight at 19 years old to think, what am I going to do with this? Is it going to be able to provide me an income that is sustainable in this region,
Yeah.
so to speak?
Yeah.
And so I kind of just kept going back. So when I was a kid, I was always interested in medicine. I was going to be a doctor for a long, long time. And then I got a B in honors biology, and that tabled that dream. I was crushed. So I kind of started thinking more about that. I'm like, well, what if I went back into medicine? What do I want to be a doctor? I didn't think at that point that I wanted to make that commitment to go back into, all the way through, go get my, chemistry or biology degree because we know how I feel about biology. And then go through residency and do all of that kind of stuff. And honestly, I didn't know if by that point I was kind of the recruiting team lead and I didn't know if I wanted to be that responsible for people all the time. And so I started to think about nursing. I actually called the UW nursing program because that's where I got my first degree. And they referred me to the local community colleges at that point. They said, you know what, you already have your bachelor's degree. Go get your associate's in nursing if this is what you really want to do. And then come back to us when you're ready to get your master's and we'll talk. So I'm like, okay. So started looking at all the programs. Well, the nursing programs are super, super, super competitive. And I discovered that instead of taking all the fun science classes like I did in college, like astronomy and oceanography and weather, which is actually really fun, I had to go back and take all my hard sciences, like my chemistry, my biology, once again, psychology, microbiology, all of that kind of stuff. So I just kind of, I don't even know at what point I made the decision, but I just bit the bullet and I said, okay, I'm just going to take one class and see what I do.
And were you working full-time at that point?
Yep.
Okay.
So I was working full-time. The first class I went back and did was a chemistry class. I took it at night. Actually, it was a weekend class. So I took it at weekend. Nobody knew what I was doing. Nobody.
So you just disappear for hours
Not
at a
even my
time.
mom and dad at that point. So yeah, well, no, I would leave at 5 o'clock and just boogie and try to get out of there without anybody seeing me. And so the first one I did was chemistry. I'm like, okay, that wasn't so bad. And then I did biology and then psychology. And then by that time, my family was kind of like, okay, she's really kind of seriously thinking about this. And then it wasn't until I hit anatomy and physiology that I was like, okay, yeah, this is probably what I should have done the first time around if I had had a little bit more foresight and a little bit more guidance into who I am and what I like. So then from there, it just kind of snowballed. But I made it all the way through all the prerequisites with only one person outside of my family knowing what I was doing.
Wow. And was that because it was deeply personal to you?
Well, I still wasn't 100% certain. I mean, I don't ever make decisions quickly. I'm a thinker. Do I really want to do it? Yes, no, yes, no. I go back and forth, and finally I just kind of take the leap and jump. So once I was through all those prerequisites, I had to decide, I had to either do it or not do it. And I was still working full time, going to school at night.
Wow.
And I had finished all of these prerequisites. So now I had to make that decision. So I developed a plan. In the middle of all this, I was going through a relationship breakup, and so it was a little bit unnerving because I had never really been on my own or done anything on my own. I went from living at my mom and dad's to living in the dorms in college, back to my mom and dad's, and married, and then not married. And I was like, well, can I do this? Can I really do this? I didn't have that confidence in myself, and I just decided, you know what? Regardless of what's going on, I just need to do this for me, and I need to make this break. So I applied and got in.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so let's talk about how long that took. So you're working full time, you're taking one class a semester, and then you apply.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how long was laying the groundwork for you to be able to get to the application into this very competitive environment?
Yeah, so it probably took me, I would say, about 1 to 2 years, school years,
right?
Because I did do summer school, so it was a little bit of probably about 1.5 years altogether to get all the prerequisites done. And then it was January 2004 when I decided, okay, I'm gonna put my applications in. And at that point, I had 2 choices. I could have applied to both, but I only applied to one. This is the way
putting all the eggs in one basket.
And I had somebody say, "Well, all your eggs are in one basket. What if it doesn't work?" And I said, "It has to work." I've done all the work.
Will it to work?
I've got the grades. I've done it. If it doesn't work, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I applied and I got in. And so my plan was at that point to work all the way through the summer, take the month off before school started, and then just not come back. So I had been prepping, doing all this groundwork, prepping them that, hey, I'm going to be gone. I'm going to be gone. I'm going to be gone. What do you want me to tell? You know, what information do you want me to give to who so that these clients are still supported?
Right.
So, you know, in the middle of all of this personal stuff I was doing, I still was trying to maintain, you know, I was maintaining my performance at work and maintaining, you know, trying to be professional and do the best job I can, because if it doesn't say anything about anybody if you just check out in the middle of a job search.
Right.
So
well, and you had invested time in those relationships too. Yeah, and you wanted to leave them in good standing.
Yeah. So when I finally told them I was leaving, I said, you know, that sabbatical we were talking about, that's not going to happen. And he was one of the VPs at the time. He kind of turned around in his chair and he's like, what? I'm like, I'm just going to leave. And his chin hit the floor.
Right.
I said, before you panic, I'm not going anywhere that you have to worry about being non-competes or any of that kind of stuff. Don't panic. I'm not doing this anymore. And when I told him what I was going to do, he just was like speechless. He had no idea. They had no clue.
Yeah.
So.
Well, but that also speaks to your testament and the fact that you were going down through this. It was a personal, professional journey, right? You have your personal life and your personal journey. You have your professional journey. But this was something that you were investing in for yourself and for your future, not only professionally but personally.
Yeah. And when he asked me why, he's like, but you make really good money here. And I'm like, I do, you know, but it's not for me at that point in my life. And probably still now, it's not about the money. And he's like, well, then what is it about? I said, you know, for me, it's about balance. And I need to do something that I can, like I said, do anywhere, that I can do it part-time if I want, and when I have a family and all of those types of things, that I can leave my work at work. Because being in that lead, in that management role, I had no balance. You know, you go on vacation and you have to specifically tell people, I'm not taking my laptop, I'm not checking my emails, but they're still calling you on the phone saying, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And it's like, you guys are grown-ups. It's a week.
Boundaries, people.
I would be sick and they would still call me at home. And it's like, I did not want to be a part of that. I really, and I still really, 10 years later, really enjoy the fact that I can leave my work at work and come home and assume my other roles, my wife and my mom role and my sister role, or, you know, all of those things, and enjoy that part of my life.
Well, and in your Christy role as an individual, right?
Exactly.
So that sounds like, when you look at, you know, a lot of the conversations, especially in the corporate environment, I'm sure you get this in healthcare as well, is you always get these employee surveys, right? Like about how you feel about the organization and stuff. And the question I find that stumps a lot of people is, how satisfied are you with the package or with the deal, right? And so it sounds like that you were looking at your deal beyond the compensation and perhaps the healthcare benefits that came along with that, right? Because you were in the middle of and growing successfully within a very, competitive but lucrative field.
Right.
And that it still wasn't matching the core of who you were
Right, exactly.
when it came to the deal.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the people. I loved making that connection between my clients and my candidates, and having them fall in love with each other, and be like, I need 10 more just like Stacy. You know, I hired a whole entire team within the city of Seattle, for example, and that was my job requirements. I need 5 more Stacys. I need 3 of these types of people. And I had literally had all but one person on this 30-person team that were my placements. And I enjoyed that part of it. And I enjoyed, like I said, working with the team of recruiters to kind of sharing candidates and trying to fill those holes. But I didn't enjoy going to work every day. I didn't enjoy if I just stay another hour, then I can not have to sit in traffic and those kinds of things.
Yep.
And feeling like all I was doing was working to earn my money instead of working to be satisfied. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think a lot of people strive for that. At what point did you realize that you were on that right track?
Well, like I said, I think the first clue was when I took the anatomy and physiology classes, and I just I really, really like this stuff. And I didn't know until I was probably through nursing school. So at that point, I had quit my job. I wasn't working. I'm like, here we go.
There's that eggs in the same all in one basket thing again.
Yeah, and it's like, or just jumping, and I don't really have a plan. I know that I think I want to do this, and so I just had to be brave.
Yeah.
And just try it, and then in the process of being in nursing school, there's a lot of people that work really, really hard in nursing school. It's school has never been a difficult issue for me, and so I could see these my cohorts working so hard and reinventing the wheel every single week with all of this paperwork that we had to do and all of these care plans and all of this kind of stuff. And so it was like I was able to help them from my IT background and say, hey, you don't have to do this brand new every single week. Let's try it this way, and show them, hey, listen, an easier way. Let's make your life a little easier. Use technology to be your friend, to make your job easier. And that helped a little bit. But then getting into oh my gosh, I'm going to graduate in a year and I don't know what I want to do. Like, I think I want to be a nurse still, but I don't know what kind of nurse I want to be. And how am I going to get that job? Because it is super competitive. And still, like I said, 10 years later, it's super competitive. I have friends that are new grads that still haven't found jobs because it's that competitive.
Wow.
And so playing off of my recruiting background and knowing, like, sometimes it's about who you know. Mm-hmm. So using some of my contacts within the healthcare industry and just getting a job as a tech. I didn't care where it was at that point. I just wanted to get into healthcare, so I had healthcare on my background, and so that's what I ended up doing. So I worked on a per diem basis as a tech for the last year of my nursing career. Worked full-time and went to nursing school full-time.
Okay, we've officially got a superwoman on our hands.
So all I can say is it can be done. I want to tell people that it can be done.
Yeah.
And people think, oh my gosh, in nursing school, there's no way you're going to ever have time. And it's if you're smart and efficient about it,
right.
you can do it.
Well, and that sounds like some of those transferable skills that you took from the tech industry.
Yeah, and knowing that I needed to get in, and I got the interview for the nursing job because I knew somebody. And at that point, my thought was, how do I feel about that? How do I feel that I got it? Not because of what my resume or what my skill set shows, but that I happen to know somebody. And I was like, I don't care. I'll take my interview, and I'm going to get the job because of who I am and what I can do. So,
well, but I also think that leads into the networking and relationship building, skills that we have within us every single day. But in some industries, it's more emphasized. The importance of networking and building relationships in the tech industry is hugely important. But it turns out it's actually important across the board.
Everywhere, yeah.
But it's less obvious perhaps in healthcare.
Right.
We'll get into the relationship building into your current role here in a second because it's got to be super important of what you're doing today. So what are some of the other transferable skills that you've taken from tech into healthcare that you use today?
Tech specific or recruiting, I guess that would be. To me, they're both. A little bit different. I guess, for me, technology, healthcare is going to technology. When I first started in the nursing field 9 years ago, there were still paper orders. Like the doctors would write all of their orders on paper. And all of these nurses who've been doing it for 20 and 30 years, that's what they were comfortable with. But then there's this push to do electronic medical records, all this EMR and electronic, medication dispensation and all of that, and it was so overwhelming to some of these people, and to be able to be comfortable enough in it to embrace it, but also kind of bring them along and say, hey, it's not that bad. I promise. Let me show you how to do this. And, knowing even as simple as putting up a rule in your inbox so you don't get all of the system administrator downtime, notifications. They just go automatically to your deleted button. They were like, that's amazing. I didn't know you could do that.
Genius!
I was like, ooh. I actually had a friend who just commented on that. She's like, well, I still have that. Thank you.
Nice.
So, those kinds of things. And like I said, the technology is changing so fast that even what I do at the bedside on a daily basis, I'm using ultrasounds now to start IVs where,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I didn't even know there was a thing.
Yeah, it's possible.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. I mean, and they have technology that you can use. One of the docs was showing me that he has an inhaler that's linked to his phone, and it records every time he uses his inhaler, but also records the air quality, what the pollen count is, and all of this kind of stuff, so they can look at what the trends are and, project when you're going to get an increase in asthmatic patients, for example. So, I mean, it's pretty crazy what technology is doing with healthcare.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of it, from the recruiting standpoint, developing those relationships with your candidates, that rapport that you have to develop with your patients is really tricky sometimes. And you have to be able to really read people and know what it is that they need from you at any given moment. And it's hard in emergency situations. So
because every single patient has to be different, right?
Yeah.
Like, even if you had twins coming in with the exact same affliction, there's got to be something different, these little nuances that are different about them.
And that would be, the caveat would be to understand that as a nurse, I work in the emergency department. And I know up on a medical floor, you're going to get more of, like say a surgical floor or an oncology floor. You're going to kind of get a little bit more of a standard type of patient, but you still have to be able to look at that patient for the time that you have with them, whether it's 2 hours or 2 weeks, and make some sort of personal connection with them so that they feel comfortable and confident with the care that you're providing for them.
And so that would speak to, and we've actually got another episode about this, but what is the legacy that you're going to leave behind based on that interaction, whether it be for 2 hours or for 2 weeks?
Right.
Wow. So I actually want to get a little bit deeper into the emergency room stuff because I find that super fascinating. So let's take a quick break. But when we come back, we're going to talk to Christy about what a quote unquote typical day looks like in the emergency room. Thanks for listening. Don't miss a single episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. So welcome back. We're sitting down with Christy Fox, and Christy is a registered nurse at an emergency room department here in the larger Seattle area. So let's just dig into the dirtiness of what it means to be in the thick of the emergency room situation. I mean, I would imagine that you have to be very conscious about going into not only nursing in general, but picking emergency.
Yeah, it's definitely not a specialty that is for everybody. And that's one of the beauties of medicine, I think, even, from being a doctor to a tech or a nurse, is that there's something for everybody. And I didn't fall into emergency the same way that I fell into recruiting. It was a little bit more of a deliberate decision. And just going through nursing school and going through all the clinical rotations, it was more a matter of not that I want to do emergency, but I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this, and kind of ruling things out. And I've spoken with a couple people who are physicians as well, and that's kind of how they end up in their specialties as well. And so I kind of had it narrowed down to either critical care or emergency, primarily because the thing I love about emergency is the variety and the pace. It is not a static environment. It's a very dynamic environment, and you really never know what you're going to get. And honestly, I know this sounds terrible as a nurse, but I don't have to invest too much of myself for too long in somebody. That's just not my personality. I want the time that I spend with that person to be quality time and for them to feel that they are cared for in the amount of time. But I have to be honest, like spending 12 hours with one person is not my idea of a good time. So that's why you send your kids to school. So, I love them.
But that's a strength that you've identified, right? Yeah. That you have a strength in a different area, and it does not include.
And you have to really be able to think quickly on your feet and adjust to changing situations. Because, if somebody comes in presenting with a certain complaint, and they're not necessarily going to stay the same way that they were when they came in. We had an example just actually yesterday at work where a patient was fine, was awake and talking, and then 10 minutes later had almost a non-blood pressure and was completely confused and altered mentally. And so you have to be able to look at that and think critically and say, okay, what do I need to do in this kind of situation? What tools do I have? Who do I need to pull into this and hopefully fix that situation? So it's a little bit tricky. It's not like it's on TV. I have to tell you that. It's not ER. It's not Chicago Med, but there are days where you cannot get caught up, and it's just they just do not stop coming, and people are waiting and waiting and unhappy because they're waiting. And then there's days where, Seattle Seahawks are playing and nobody's in the ER. So
those are the good days.
The good days. You enjoy those days.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Well, and that makes you appreciate those days when it is maybe a little bit more quiet.
Yeah.
But you have to have the agility to be able to be running at 100 or sitting around catching up on paperwork.
And so, there's not really a typical day in the ER. And for me, I wear a lot of hats at work. So for me, it depends on what my job assignment or my role is that day. So I can work as a charge nurse. I can work as a triage nurse. I can work just as a general, floor nurse, which is sometimes heavenly when I only have 4 people that I have to worry about at a given time. I also work in the capacity where I help train new nursing grads to our department and understand, help them understand the flow and what they're doing and why they're doing this with people. So, like I said, any given day it's different. So I do like that a lot.
That's awesome. Well, and it also sounds like you've been able to carry on this leadership role, whether it be in a formal capacity or an unofficial capacity.
Right.
But that your first career set you up to identify the areas of strength that you have from a leadership perspective.
Yeah,
right?
I think so. And I think that certain roles within the department, like being a triage nurse is not for everybody. You can be an amazing emergency room nurse and be a terrible triage nurse. You can be an amazing ER nurse and be a terrible charge nurse. There is a little bit of a political dynamic that is involved in that, and trying to make sure that you understand what your patients need, you understand what your staff needs, and understand what your docs want. There's a difference
very
there.
different things, yes.
There's a difference there. And then in the middle of all of that, basically the charge nurse manages the whole flow of the department, right? And so you're the captain of the ship, and if the ship's sinking, you're the one playing the violin on the deck, right? So, and everybody is looking to you to say, what are we going to do to fix this? How are we going to right this ship? Even the docs. So, and then in the meantime, you've got all the aid crews that are bringing in the sick patients and, the dying patients and the people with, I hurt my toe and I need to come in an ambulance patients, because that's what we get. And so there is, like I said, a big, huge political component about it. And if you don't have kind of a certain sense about how to handle that kind of stress and how to handle people, that I don't think if I hadn't worked in IT, I would have as easily. So it does translate. When you spend your morning doing something and then you have to undo it, like I said earlier, in the afternoon, it's kind of like ER.
So inadvertently, your tech career was actually setting you up for the emergency room.
I actually ran into my my boss, the one that when I left IT, I ran into him in the ER. He was there with his daughter, and he's like, "I can't believe you work here." And I said, "Well, I worked for you for 7 years." And he says, "Oh, I guess it's not that crazy." So
that's great.
Yeah, and so it does translate. And the typical day is anything from, finger sprains, ankle sprains to abdominal pain. Oh, we do a lot of stroke and we do a lot of heart attack in my ER. We don't do a lot of trauma just because of the location of Harborview, which is the major trauma center. But we do get our fair share of really sick and critical patients. And so it's not just treating the belly pains, but it's like thinking more critically about why did this gentleman drop his blood pressure and why is he not maintaining the way he was, and trying to put those pieces together.
So the troubleshooting and the agility to be able to think on your feet and change directions pretty quickly, because ultimately a patient's health depends on your ability to be able
life.
to Yeah. It's literally life or death.
Literally in some cases,
Yeah. That just requires a whole lot.
Some blood pressure medication.
Yeah, exactly.
I will tell you, my blood pressure's lower as an ER nurse than it was as a recruiter. So
interesting. Oh my gosh.
Because I have balance.
So all right. So let's talk about the balance thing. You had mentioned earlier that you wanted to be in a career that allowed you to keep work at work. But let's be honest.
Right.
Can you really keep it at work every single day?
Not every day.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit easier in the fact that when I leave work, I'm not responsible for those people anymore. in the same way that you are as a manager, And so I can say, okay, Stacy, you're coming on, you're taking over. This is your patient load. This is what's been done. This is what needs to be done. This is what we need to look out for. And be able to hand that off and trust that it's going to be taken care of and not have to get phone calls at 11 o'clock at night and say, oh my gosh, what do we do? So in that aspect, yes, there's definitely balance. There are days where, and there are patients that you never forget. And whether it's comical and funny, I can't believe that just happened. Am I on TV? Or patients that really, really touch you in a certain way, depending on what their circumstances or what happened to them. Right. There's just patients you just will never forget.
Yeah.
And I think anybody in healthcare, firefighters, doctors, anybody will tell you the same thing.
Yeah.
You'll never forget the first time you did XYZ to somebody,
Well,
because they're people.
Yeah. And this is interesting. These people have no idea that they are a part of your career development path, right? Because the first time you do that has basically broken the ice for you to do it again the next time.
And you're terrified. And, and I tell you, there's things in the emergency. I went through a 4-month residency. So after I graduated, I got my job in the emergency room. I was paired with a nurse for 4 months. And every day that I worked with this nurse. And at the end of that residency, you would think that you have done everything, but you haven't. There's no way that you can be good at everything. And so knowing your resources, knowing the people you work with, knowing who to go to ask the questions to, and not being afraid to ask those questions. Say, hey, you know what? Even 9 years later, I'd be like, I have only done this once. Can you, talking to one of the docs, can you walk me through this? Why are we doing it this way? And not being afraid to ask the hard questions and not being afraid to look stupid. Because I will tell you that there are times where you go in and you do something to a patient you've never done before, and they are like, how many times have you done this? Are you good at this? You kind of have to fake it sometimes. And the ultimate goal would be to not cause harm to the patient and to be able to help them and care for them. I had one girl ask me how many IVs I had started in my career. And at that point, I was like, a lot. I think I did the math at that point, and I had, for that point in my career, it had been over 15,000 IV starts, which is astronomical. But
wow.
There are people there who have 20 more years of experience than I do.
Right.
So you think about that.
Well, and there's someone that's doing it for the very first time.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And their hands shaking, and it takes them forever. And I remember being there,
But you're also in a position now, 10 years in, to provide that guidance to a new nurse coming in, right?
Yeah.
And that it will be okay, and that it's actually better to ask too many questions than not enough.
Yeah. I have a little story for you. When I first got off my residency, I was working nights, and there was a night shift charge. They had 2 night shift charges, and they would just alternate. So that's all they did was they were the charge nurse on night shift, which is an entirely different animal than day shift, I will tell you. Night shift workers are amazing. And I said to her, I said, Sandy, I feel like I'm fooling everybody. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I feel like people think I know things, and I'm just like, I don't know anything. And she said to me, she goes, you know what? I've been doing this for 30 years, and I think that every day when I leave. And then she asked me, she said to me, this isn't your first job, is it? And I said, no. And she says, tell me what you used to do. So I kind of told her a little bit about my history. And she's like, that makes a lot of sense. I can see that in the way that you manage your patients and you manage the communication between the other nurse, the staff and the docs and things like that. And it was actually kind of a compliment and a little bit edifying to me because I feel like, okay, there are days still, even almost 10 years in, that I feel like I'm just like a big faker.
Just winging it.
Yeah.
But that people feel like that regardless of the industry that they're
I think
in.
so, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. In the tech industry, people are like, I'm waiting for someone to come up and tap me on the shoulder and say, we've just figured out that you have no idea what you're doing.
You just look like you're busy.
Right. But have the confidence that of the knowledge that you have and the experience that you have and that you're bringing value to the table.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And like you said, that goes across any industry.
Yeah.
So if you're making that change, like try to take the things that you like about what you do and even if it's not the right career, but there are probably things that you're good at.
Yeah.
And say, okay, how does this translate into maybe what I'm thinking? People skills. For me, it was like people skills and developing that relationship and that rapport because, in the ER, I only have sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 3 or 4 hours to develop a rapport with people. And I feel like I'm a pretty good judge of personality and character and know when somebody can handle maybe a little kind of sarcasm and a little joking to maybe alleviate their fears and when somebody cannot. And say, okay, and just be honest with them and just say, this is what we're doing, X, Y, Z. We're going to do it, and then we're going to have a game plan. And I think by being honest with those people, even kids in the ER, they always want to know, is this going to hurt? And I'm like, yeah, it's going to hurt just for a little bit, and then it'll feel better. And then kids are actually amazing. Most of them do better than adults when you're honest with them.
Right.
Say, it's going to hurt, but your job is to hold still. Okay, you can scream, you can cry, you can do whatever you need to, but I need you to hold still. Okay, and they do it. It's amazing.
That's amazing. Like, maybe we can all learn something from like looking at, watching a kid in the ER, like just how they compose themselves.
Yeah.
And because they are looking to the experts, right? And they're handing over the confidence to say, I need you to fix me. And if you tell me that it's going to hurt, I believe you.
Right.
But if you also tell me that it's going to feel better, I believe you too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, being honest with them, but also being able to just say, okay, this is what we need to do, and I need you. And like engaging them and say, I need you to do this for me. And it makes them feel like they're part of that process.
So communication. Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
I don't think you can teach that. You have to learn that. I really do.
Yeah, it's a soft skill.
You can go through school and you have people that are so book smart and like could ace you out of any test, and they get hands-on with the patient and they freeze up and they don't know what to do. And so, those are, I think, life skills that you learn just by doing and being around people and talking with people and figuring out what's okay and what's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and having a bedside manner doesn't necessarily have to be exclusive to healthcare. Right. You can have a bedside or an office side manner with a variety of people on your team. Right. You have to treat them all differently based on their different types of communications and how they handle information and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And communicating to them in a way that they're going to receive what you're trying to communicate to them.
Right. And that you're in it together to be able to get to the end game. You've all got a common goal.
You haven't met your metrics this month, but let's figure out what we can do to get you there,
Yeah, that's awesome. So what advice would you give to folks that are considering a career transition, not exclusive to healthcare, but just in general? And then maybe there is someone out there that's considering, well, I actually have always considered medicine as a path for me to take.
Yeah. I think, first of all, is to be brave and not let your uncertainty hold you back, because it is a big, huge leap sometimes to go complete 180 degrees and just say, okay. But before you make that leap, take the time to really consider what it is that you're looking for. What is it that you want in a job or a career? What is it that you are comfortable doing? Maybe what is it that you're not comfortable doing but you've always wanted to do? And kind of look at it and figure out how that can translate into something that can, help you pay the bills. And really decide what your motivations are. Because, some people, they need the job that's going to pay them a certain amount of money. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people need a job that's going to make them feel warm and fuzzy. Some people need, I needed balance. And I needed something I could leave at work and do anywhere. So you need to take a step back and kind of reassess why you think you want to make it. But I think you be brave and research it and figure it out and make it happen.
So if anyone's out there listening today and they feel stuck or frustrated about, kind of figuring out what it is they want to do, that it's okay to try and figure out what it is that you don't want to do. Right. And that it does take time.
And start small. I mean, like for me, it was like a class a night, at night. Yep. In secret. Yeah. Maybe not in secret. That was a little a little stressful, but tell somebody.
Find your trusted circle. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Because there's a vulnerability to telling people as well, right? Like it's putting yourself out there and you're letting people know before you arrive that you're actually stepping off.
When I finally told my mom what I was thinking, because she's been in healthcare for her whole life, she said to me, "Why do you want to go to nursing school? You should go to medical school. You're smart enough to go to medical school." And I said to her, I said, "Mom, I am smart enough not to go to medical school." and she was just like, "Okay."
Yeah. Enough said. I like that. Oh, I love that. Okay. So I think there's so many great pieces that people can apply to their career regardless of what industry they're in. Figure out what it is that aligns to your values, your priorities in life, because one of your drivers was that you were looking for balance, but that took into consideration your personal life as well, right? So find out what those things are and then find the industries that will be able to deliver that for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this was a career I should have done the first time through, I think. But I think that if I hadn't been in the IT and the recruiting industry, there's so many things that I have taken away from it that wouldn't be part of who I am and allow me to succeed at what I'm doing now. Yep. So you have to look at it that way. There's something good in everything you're doing.
Absolutely.
You may have a really crappy job right now, but there's probably something in it that you're learning that you can apply to your next better job.
Absolutely. So here's a few standard questions that we ask each guest. What was your first job, and what were some of the fundamentals that you took from that job that you still use today?
My very first job, I probably babysitting. I used to babysit for the docks that my mom worked for, which was a pretty sweet gig. But but just kind of being responsible for somebody else other than yourself, and being honest, and just like, hey, this happened while you were gone, and I'm sorry, and that's hard to do sometimes. It's still hard as a grown-up to do sometimes. But so babysitting, but my first real job, I worked actually as a file clerk at my mom's clinic.
Okay.
I started working when I was 14, and I've worked ever since. I've never not had a job.
Yeah.
Well, except for that 1 year in nursing school. That job was, it was just basically pulling the charts for the patients that were coming in the next day and then filing things like the lab reports and dictation reports in the charts. But what I got really good at is knowing where the charts were in the office. And so I knew that they were in dictation or they were on a doctor's desk or all of this. And so people, if they couldn't find them, would ask me, hey, have you seen da-da-da-da-da? And I would be able to do that. So just kind of, I don't know what skill that is. I have this freakish memory for useless information. So,
well, I look at that as
it.
Incredibly organized and understanding the process, right? Because you had to understand what the workflow was to be able to kind of identify where it could have been in the process, right? Someone that doesn't have a handle on what that workflow looks like would probably be running around trying to look for a file.
I feel so much better now. But that job, I mean, even at 14, I think I knew enough to work hard and do a good job.
Yeah.
Do it right.
Yeah. See, so this healthcare thing, that started way before way before you went to college. Okay. So what have you read recently, listened to, or watched that you'd recommend?
So I was actually there's a book that I read recently, and I cannot, for the life of me, I'm sorry, remember what the title of it is. Okay. And it's not in my Goodreads, and I'm ashamed that it's not. But it was a book about the Women's Air Service Patrol. So I read a lot of historical fiction. And for some reason, read a lot of World War II historical fiction, which 10 years ago I would never have admitted to. But there's, I think, a movie coming out, and it's about these women who, during World War II, were left behind, but they didn't go work in the factories. They learned how to fly planes. And they would fly planes to fly, supplies and resources all over the U.S. to get the troops ready to go overseas. And I thought that was pretty cool that these women were, had this tenacity to know, I want to fly, and I'm going to figure out how to do it. And they did it. And it was pretty cool. And some of them are getting these medals of honor now, posthumous Medal of Honor. And it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. So we'll figure out what that title is, and we'll actually have it posted on the website in the show notes. Okay. So you're sitting down across from 90-year-old Christy, and you're having a coffee with her today. What would she say to you?
Oh. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and steal a line from my 93-year-old grandmother.
Okay.
Who recently told me I was showing her how to take a selfie on my phone. And she said to me, "That's so amazing. I'm so glad that I learned all the things that I learned in my life. I wish I had enjoyed that and paid more attention to that and appreciated that more when I was younger." So I think that taking that is kind of being able to stop and say, you know what? Every life has its valleys and its, mountaintops and things like that. But there's some value in all of that experience. And never stop learning, never stop trying, never, just the small stuff is small stuff.
That's great. Oh, well, it's great that you're able to have that conversation with your grandmother, right? Yeah. And so she's kind of... She's able to give you insight into what that perspective looks like.
And she's interesting. She worked her whole entire life. Even when my dad was really little, she worked. And it wasn't because she had to. It's because that was who she was and she wanted to do it. And I think that's, in the 1940s and 50s, that wasn't very common. Yeah. And it just shows a strength of character that I really admire in her. And, I would hope that I would be able to pass on to my kids as well. It's enjoy the education process, learn as much as you can, and just, enjoy what you're learning about yourself.
Well, and that you never stop learning.
Right, exactly.
You don't have to be in an official kind of schooling or educational program.
You can read historical fiction
books. There you
go. And learn there.
That's awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation, Christy. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm looking forward to hearing from listeners that are in their career evaluation phase right now and determining whether they need to take a hard left or, just to be able to find something that's bigger than what they're doing today. Yeah. So thank you so much. Yes. This has been awesome. And we'll have more information about Christy's conversation today in the show notes at thecareerq.com. And we will chat with you next time.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Jack Straw Cultural Center in Seattle, Washington.
You think
I just want to hang out in the emergency room.